I stood in the barn doorway that Thursday morning watching Grandpa Walter freeze like somebody had unplugged him from the world. 30 seconds passed, maybe longer. His weathered hands hung at his sides, tools for a lifetime suddenly useless. His eyes locked on the John Deere Model B sitting in its usual spot, and I watched his face cycle through emotions I'd never seen before: confusion, recognition, horror. The machine looked different because it was different. I'd made sure of that. New carburetor gleaming where the old one had sat for 21 years. Modified exhaust manifold, catching the morning light slanting through gaps in the barn walls. Air intake system I'd designed myself, tested 3 times on dead engines before I ever touched this one. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand why Grandpa stood there like the ground had opened beneath him, you need to know about that Sunday in late July when everything started to crack. The Morgan farm sat on 60 acres of Kansas flatland where the horizon stretched so far you could watch tomorrow coming at you across the wheat fields. Our house wore white paint that had given up fighting the sun years ago, turning gray and peeling in long strips. The barn held its red color better, though rust ate at the tin roof in one corner where Grandpa kept meaning to patch it. We'd lived through worse than peeling paint. The drought of '66 had killed 40% of our crop, left the soil cracked and mean. But the real weight pressing down on us that summer of '67 was money. $3,800 owed to First National Bank of Oak Ridge, due September 15th. 6 weeks away. Grandma Helen kept a ledger in the kitchen drawer, her careful handwriting tracking every penny we had left. $127.50. Not nearly enough. We had 6 weeks before the bank took everything. 6 weeks to find money we didn't have. But the real heart of everything, the piece that kept us alive or would kill us trying, was that John Deere sitting in the barn. Green and yellow paint faded to ghosts of their original colors. Grandpa had bought it in 1946 when he came back from the war, used even then. 21 years of plowing, planting, harvesting. 21 years of keeping us fed. Grandpa Walter Mitchell didn't talk much about the war. Didn't talk much about anything, really. 68 years old, tall and lean as a fence post, skin dark from decades under the Kansas sun. He had a way of moving through the world like he was trying not to disturb it, like if he stayed quiet enough, the bad things might not notice him. The only thing he ever said about fighting in Europe was, "This equipment you can trust saves lives. Learned that at Normandy." Then his jaw would set, and the conversation was over. Every evening at 6 o'clock, he'd walk out to the barn and spend an hour with that tractor, checking oil, greasing fittings, running his hands over belts and hoses. It was like watching someone perform a religious ritual. Maybe it was one. Maybe that machine was the only god he still believed in after whatever he'd seen in France. The tractor meant even more after 1960, after we lost my father. Robert Morgan was 25 when he died. I was 8. The details lived in the spaces between what people would tell me, the way adults edited their sentences when I walked into rooms. An accident, they said. The tractor, they said. Quick, they said, like that made it better. But what nobody told me, what they edited from every conversation, was how my father really died. I wouldn't learn the truth for 7 more years. Grandpa never talked about it at all. He just got quieter. Spent longer hours in the barn, held his tools like they might slip away if he loosened his grip. Grandma Helen was the spine that held our crooked house upright. 66 years old, silver hair always pinned in a neat bun, wearing aprons with tiny flower prints she'd sewn herself. She managed every dollar like a general deploying troops, her ledger thick as a Bible and twice as sacred. She knew exactly where we stood. $3,800 in debt, $127.50 in the bank, $43 a month for insulin. The diabetes had caught up with her 5 years back. Type 2, the doctor said, handing over prescriptions we could barely afford. Sometimes she'd skip meals to save money. Thought I didn't notice, but I saw everything. Saw how she'd portion out smaller servings for herself, claiming she wasn't hungry while Grandpa and I ate. She was the one who taught me to think before acting, to measure twice and cut once. All those old sayings that sound simple until you're standing in the middle of a decision that could wreck everything. Sarah, she'd say, sitting across from me at the kitchen table while I did homework, being smart isn't knowing what to do. It's knowing when not to do something. I should have listened better. My full name was Sarah Morgan, but most people called me just Sarah. 15 years old that summer, 5'4" skinny, in a way that made me look breakable, even though I could carry feed sacks that made grown men grunt. My hair was brown with blonde streaks from the sun cut short because long hair got caught in machinery. Grandma hated it. Said I looked like a boy. Maybe I did. I didn't care much about looking like the other girls at Oak Ridge High School anyway. They wore dresses with patent leather shoes, talked about Beatles albums, and which boys had the nicest cars. I wore jeans with oil stains, work boots that used to be my father's read popular mechanics, like other girls read romance novels. The other girls thought I was strange. They weren't wrong. While they were learning to curl their hair, I was taking apart alarm clocks to see how the gears meshed. While they practiced walking in heels, I was learning to read engine compression by sound alone. I didn't have friends at school, just Amanda Parker, and she was barely around anymore since her family started spending summers at their lake house. My sister Claire was the responsible one, 20 years old, beautiful in that effortless way some people have, blonde hair that actually stayed where she put it. She'd graduated nursing school 2 years ago and worked at Mercy Hospital 40 miles away in Junction City. Made $80 a week and sent home whatever she could spare after rent and gas. We were opposites, Claire and me. She was organized, graceful, knew how to talk to people without making them uncomfortable. But she never treated me like I was defective for being different. She'd gotten engaged last Christmas to Stephen Clark, an orderly at the hospital. Quiet guy, kind eyes, treated Claire like she was made of something precious. They were planning a wedding for next June, assuming we still had a farm to celebrate on. That Sunday, July 23rd, 1967, started like most Sundays. Church in the morning at the Methodist Chapel, where Pastor Whitmore preached sermons about faith and perseverance. Grandma's pot roast for lunch, the kind that filled the house with smells that made you forget about money troubles for an hour. The afternoon stretched lazy and hot temperature climbing toward 95. Then Claire drove up in her Ford Falcon, dust trailing behind her on the gravel road. She came inside carrying worry in her shoulders, the kind of tension that meant bad news was coming. She sat at the kitchen table while Grandma poured iced tea, condensation beating on the glasses in the summer heat. The hospital raised prices on insulin. They need another $200 this month. Grandma Helen didn't say anything at first, just sat down, opened her ledger, ran her finger down the columns of numbers. Her face stayed neutral, but I saw her hand shake slightly before she closed the book. We don't have it. $200. We didn't have it. Wouldn't have it. The math was simple and cruel. Current savings, $127.50. Debt due $3,800 on September 15th. New insulin cost adding $200 more. Total needed $4,000. Time remaining 6 weeks. That was the first time I'd ever heard Grandma Helen cry, and that's when I knew something had to change. Around 3 o'clock, an engine sound came up the driveway. Not the familiar rattle of our neighbors' trucks, but something newer, smoother. I looked out the window and saw Brandon Brennan's red Jeep Wrangler. Brandon was 16, a year older than me. His father, Richard Brennan, owned 400 acres on the other side of Oak Ridge, The biggest farm in the county. 5 tractors, all new. A white 2-story house that looked like it belonged in a magazine. A black Mercedes sedan that Richard drove to church on Sundays, parking it far from everyone else's dusty pickups. Brandon climbed out of his Jeep wearing clean Levi's and a polo shirt, looking like he'd never touched dirt in his life. He wandered over to where Grandpa was checking fence posts near the barn. "Saw your old Model B in the barn. My dad says tractors that old belong in museums. Wonder it still runs." Grandpa didn't answer, just kept working the way he always did when people said things that didn't deserve responses. Brandon looked over, saw me standing on the porch. His grin got wider, the kind of smile that made my stomach tight with anger. "Oh, right. You're the girl who thinks she's a mechanic. Cute." My hands curled into fists at my sides, nails digging into palms. "Girls don't really understand machinery, do they? I mean, it's not your fault. Just biology." Amanda Parker was riding past on her bicycle, heading home from somewhere. She slowed, heard the whole thing, saw my face, watched Brandon climb back in his Jeep and drive away, dust rising behind him like an insult. She coasted into our driveway, 1 foot on the ground to balance. "Want me to slash his tires?" "No, I want to prove him wrong." Brandon Brennan thought I was just a girl playing with tools. I was going to show him and everyone else exactly what I could do. That night I couldn't sleep. Lay in bed listening to the house settle to crickets outside my window, to the weight of everything pressing down. Around 11 I heard voices from the kitchen, low murmurs that pulled me from bed. I crept to my bedroom door, opened it just enough to hear Grandpa's voice, first rough with exhaustion. "Helen, we don't have the money." "I know, Walter." Silence long enough that I thought maybe the conversation was over. Then Grandma's voice, so quiet I almost missed it. "Maybe we should consider selling the farm." More silence. Longer this time. Then something I'd never heard before, Grandma Helen crying. Not loud, not dramatic. Just small, broken sounds that made my chest hurt. I closed my door as quietly as I could, sat on my bed, stared at the wall. Something had to change. We needed money. We needed the farm to produce more, faster, better. We needed that old tractor to work like it was worth something. And maybe I needed to prove something too. Prove that Brandon Brennan was wrong. Prove that being a girl didn't make me useless. Prove that my father had been right when he said I could do this work. The idea started forming then, though I didn't recognize it yet. Not fully. Just a whisper in the back of my mind saying, what if? The next morning I went up to the attic. We kept most of my father's things up there, boxes and trunks. Nobody had the heart to sort through. Dust motes floating in the air, heat already building even though it was barely past dawn. I dug through them until I found what I was looking for. An old leather journal, the cover worn soft with age. Inside, my father's handwriting. Neat, careful, the letters slanting slightly to the right. I flipped through pages of notes about crops, weather expenses. Then I found an entry from June 15th, 1960. Today I tried to modify the carburetor on the John Deere. Thought I could increase horsepower by 20% if I changed the fuel mixture and airflow. I was wrong. Failed completely. Nearly destroyed the engine. Dad was furious. Said I was reckless. Maybe he was right. But someday someone will figure out how to make these old machines work better. Maybe it'll be Sarah, my smart girl. She'll be better than I was. The page was dated 3 weeks before he died. My father had tried the exact same thing I was planning, and it killed him. I sat in the dusty attic holding my father's journal and cried. Not just because he was gone, but because he'd believed in me. Written it down, left it there like a message he knew I'd eventually find. He thought I could do this. That's when the idea stopped being a whisper and became a plan. For the next 6 weeks I prepared. Every day after my chores were done, I rode my bicycle 3 miles into town to the library. Mrs. Patterson, the librarian, started setting aside books she thought I'd like. Internal combustion engines, carburetor design, exhaust systems. I filled notebooks with diagrams, calculated airflow rates, fuel ratios, compression changes, drew 47 different versions of how I could modify our tractor's carburetor to increase power output without sacrificing reliability. But I needed to test my ideas before touching the John Deere. That's where Catherine Walsh came in. Catherine Walsh lived in a small house on the edge of Oak Ridge, her workshop out back filled with welding equipment and metal stock. Everyone in town just called her Catherine, though some of the older men still muttered about women doing men's work. 58 years old, widowed since 1963, when her husband's heart gave out. She was the only welder within 50 miles, and she was better than any man they could find. She'd fix their problems, charge them fair rates, and they'd pay while looking at their feet. I'd started helping her when I was 13, cleaning her house, cooking meals, doing laundry. In exchange, she taught me to weld. Not just how to strike an arc and run a bead, but how to understand what the metal was doing, how heat changed its structure where strength lived in a joint. Welding isn't about melting metal together, she'd say, face shield raised, showing me a perfect bead. It's about understanding what the metal needs. Listen to it, feel it, respect it. 2 years she'd been teaching me. I got good enough that she sometimes let me handle small jobs while she supervised, but she'd warned me early on, her eyes sharp behind safety glasses. Never practice on something you can't afford to lose. Understand? I'd nodded, agreed, meant it at the time. Catherine had an old engine in her workshop pulled from her late husband's truck years ago. Dead useless. Perfect for experimentation. I worked on it 3 times over those 6 weeks. The first attempt, I forgot to torque down a bolt properly. The whole assembly rattled apart when I tried to run it, pieces scattering across her workshop floor. Catherine made me clean up every fragment, explain what went wrong, calculate the exact specifications I should have used. The second time, I welded a bracket at the wrong angle. The metal cracked under stress, a sound like a gunshot in the quiet workshop. She made me cut it off, grind it smooth, start over. The third time, everything held together. The modified carburetor pulled more air, mixed fuel better, ran smoother than the original design. The engine fired up with a sound that made my chest tight with something between pride and terror. Because if I could make this work on a dead engine, maybe I could make it work on the one keeping my family alive. Catherine found me in her workshop that afternoon, grinning at a greasy engine that actually worked. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "What exactly are you planning to do with all this knowledge?" "Just learning." Her voice wasn't angry, just curious, maybe concerned. "Sarah." She looked at me for a long moment, her eyes too knowing. She knew I was lying. She didn't press, though, not then. The opportunity came in late August. Grandpa's cousin Temperance, who lived in Kansas City, fell and broke her leg. Grandpa needed to drive up and help her make sure she had everything she needed. 4 days, he said. Claire volunteered to go with him, help with the nursing care. Grandma Helen had to go to Springfield, a town 2 hours away, to buy insulin and meet with a bank about extending our loan. The local bank had turned us down. Springfield was our last chance. She'd be gone 2 days, leaving Monday morning, planning to return Wednesday afternoon. That meant I'd have the farm to myself for 48 hours. The night before they all left, I lay in bed reviewing my plan. Every step memorized, every tool accounted for, every possible problem anticipated. I thought about what my father had written in his journal, about what Catherine had warned, about what Grandma had taught me. But I also thought about Grandma crying in the kitchen, about owing money we couldn't pay, about Brandon Brennan's smug face saying girls don't understand machinery, about my father believing I could do this. If we didn't try something different, we'd lose the farm anyway. At least this way, if I succeeded, we'd have a chance. I got out of bed, went to my desk, wrote out a list of everything I'd need, checked it 3 times, put it in my pocket. Tomorrow I'd start. Monday morning, August 28th. They left before sunrise. Grandpa's truck heading north to Kansas City, his old Ford rattling but reliable. Grandma's car heading east to Springfield, tires crunching on gravel. Claire riding with Grandpa, her nurse's bag packed for the week. I stood in the driveway, waved until both vehicles disappeared from sight. The farm was mine. 48 hours, no witnesses, no supervision, no one to stop me. I waited until both vehicles were completely gone until the dust settled and the morning birds started singing again. Then I walked to the barn. The John Deere sat in its usual spot, morning light slanting through gaps in the barn walls, dust motes floating in the beams like tiny stars. The machine looked smaller than I remembered, or maybe I'd just gotten bigger. My heart hammered against my ribs, my hands shook. This was the moment. Start or walk away. Change everything or leave it alone. I pulled out Claire's Polaroid camera, the one she'd left on the kitchen counter. Started taking pictures. The carburetor from every angle, every hose connection, every wire, every bolt. 23 photographs total, each one whirring out of the camera with that distinctive Polaroid sound developing slowly in my hands. Then I opened my notebook and started sketching, adding measurements, writing notes in the margins. Documentation. If something went wrong, I needed to know exactly how to put it back. The carburetor came off easier than I expected. I'd watched Grandpa remove it dozens of times for cleaning. My hands knew the movements, even if my brain was screaming that this was wrong, this was forbidden, this was the sacred machine and I was violating it. But the bolts turned, the fuel line disconnected, the whole assembly lifted free. I set it carefully on the workbench, this piece of metal that had been mixing air and fuel for 21 years, keeping my family fed and housed and alive. The new carburetor I'd ordered from a catalog sat waiting in my toolbox. Larger venturi, better atomization, more precise fuel metering. Modern design that would let the engine breathe properly, pull the way it should have been pulling all along. When I tried to install it, reality hit fast. One of the mounting bolts had rusted itself into the engine block. Metal fused to metal through years of heat cycles and moisture. I spent 2 hours attacking it with every tool in Grandpa's collection, penetrating oil vice grips, a breaker bar that should have snapped the bolt head clean off. Nothing worked. The bolt sat there like it had grown roots into the cast iron. By noon, sweat soaked through my shirt, and my hands ached from torque I couldn't generate. The tractor sat there half-assembled, a useless accusation in metal form. I needed equipment we didn't have, which meant going to Catherine Walsh. The bicycle ride into town felt longer than 3 miles. August sun beating down, no shade on the county road, my shirt sticking to my back. Cars passed occasionally, drivers waving without slowing. Small-town courtesy that didn't extend to stopping for a sweaty 15-year-old on a bike. Catherine's workshop sat behind her house, a metal building she'd put up herself after her husband died. The sound of her torch reached me before I got there, that distinctive hiss and crackle of acetylene burning. I leaned my bike against the fence and walked around back. She was working on something for a customer, face shield down, sparks cascading. The acrid smell of hot metal and flux hung in the air. She finished her bead, killed the torch, raised the shield, looked at me with eyes that already knew why I was there. What kind of penetrating wrench? The heavy-duty kind. She set the torch down, pulled off her gloves slowly, each movement deliberate, giving me time to reconsider whatever I was about to say. "What are you working on, Sarah?" I couldn't answer. The words stuck in my throat like the bolt in that engine block. "You're touching the John Deere, aren't you?" Silence was confession enough. She studied my face, reading everything I wasn't saying. "That's the stupidest thing you've ever tried to do." "I know, but I have to try. I have to prove I can." The words came out stronger than I felt, carrying weight I didn't know I had. "Prove it to who?" "That Brennan boy, your grandpa or yourself, all of them." She stared at me. I stared back. Neither of us blinked. The workshop felt smaller suddenly, the air thicker. Outside, a mockingbird ran through its repertoire of stolen songs. "If you're determined to do something this insane, at least do it right. I'm coming with you." Catherine knew what I was risking. She also knew I wouldn't stop, so she made sure I didn't die trying. We worked together the rest of Tuesday. The penetrating wrench she brought was industrial grade, the kind used on machinery that hadn't moved in decades. It took another 2 hours, both of us bearing down on the wrench with everything we had. When the bolt finally broke free, the sound was like a gunshot in the barn. Metal screaming against metal, then sudden release. The new carburetor installed cleanly after that. Catherine checked every connection I made, her hands following mine, feeling for anything loose or misaligned. She caught 2 mistakes before they became disasters. A fuel line kinked at an angle that would starve the engine. A mounting bracket torqued down unevenly, stress concentrating where it would crack. The exhaust modification was harder. I'd designed a new manifold to reduce back pressure, let the engine expel waste gases more efficiently, but welding it required precision I hadn't quite mastered. The angle had to be exact, the heat distribution perfect, the bead continuous without gaps. My first attempt cracked. The weld looked good until I let it cool, then a hairline fracture appeared right through the center. Metal failure, the kind that would blow apart under operating pressure. Wrong angle. The heat's not distributing evenly. Try again. I ground down the failed weld, started over. The second attempt cracked worse. This time the failure was immediate, metal popping as soon as I released the torch. Too much heat this time. You're burning through. Control your torch. 4 hours I spent on that exhaust manifold. My hands ached from holding the torch steady. My back hurt from bending over the work. Sweat dripped into my eyes, making the welding shield fog up. But the third attempt held. Perfect bead, even heat distribution, strong joint that would last. Catherine inspected it with her critical eye, running her fingers along the metal, feeling for imperfections invisible to sight. That'll do. We finished installing the air intake system as the sun dropped toward the horizon. Everything connected, everything tight. Everything ready. I stood back looking at what we'd accomplished. The tractor looked the same from a distance, but up close the changes were obvious. New parts gleaming among the old. A machine transformed. Rest tonight. Tomorrow we test. Catherine loaded her tools into her truck, but I couldn't rest. After she left, I went back to the barn, checked and rechecked every single bolt, every wire, every hose connection, looking for anything I'd missed, any mistake waiting to destroy everything. At 10:15, the phone rang in the house. I ran to answer it, heart already knowing this wasn't good news. Sarah, it's Claire, calling to let you know Grandma's coming home early. My stomach dropped like I'd missed a step in the dark. Early. The bank in Springfield is closed tomorrow for a holiday. She got her business done today, so she's driving back. When? Tomorrow afternoon, around 4. The clock on the kitchen wall showed 10:16. Grandma would be home in 18 hours. The tractor wasn't tested yet, wasn't proven. I needed at least a day to run it, make sure everything worked, adjust anything that needed adjusting. Okay, thanks for letting me know. I hung up, sat on the kitchen floor, stared at nothing. 18 hours, not enough time. Catherine was still outside loading tools into her truck. I went to tell her. She's coming back tomorrow at 4. Catherine looked at me for a long moment. Then we worked through the night. You don't have to. Shut up and get back in that barn. We made coffee on Grandma's stove, bitter and strong enough to strip paint. Worked through the night, checking everything again, waiting for the engine to cool before making final adjustments. Around 3 in the morning, while we sat on hay bales waiting, Catherine told me a story. My husband did something like this once, fixed my father's truck without asking permission, trying to prove he was worthy of me. Did it work? The truck number. He made a mess of it. She smiled at something I couldn't see, some memory that lived in the space between past and present. But I married him anyway. We had 28 years before his heart gave out. She looked at me directly. Sometimes the bravest thing isn't succeeding, it's trying at all. 5 o'clock Wednesday morning. The modifications were complete. Everything checked, double-checked, ready. Time to see if any of this actually worked. I climbed into the John Deere seat. The metal was cold, despite August heat still radiating from the previous day. My hands found the key, turned it. Deep breath. Everything I'd worked for, everything I'd risked, came down to this moment. I pressed the starter button. The engine turned over once, twice, nothing. Just the cough of an engine trying to catch failing dying. Panic flooded through me like ice water. I'd broken it, killed the only thing keeping my family alive. All that preparation, all that care, and I'd destroyed everything anyway. Catherine leaned in, checking connections with the calm of someone who'd seen this before. Found a loose wire you missed. Here, try again. I turned the key, pressed the button. The engine turned 3 times, 4. Then it roared to life with a sound I'd never heard before. Deeper, stronger, like something that had been sleeping wrong finally woke up properly. I sat there feeling the vibrations through the seat, listening to the engine sing, in a voice that was familiar but transformed. Metal and combustion and 21 years of history all running together in a new configuration. It worked. It actually worked. Working for 5 minutes and working for 5 years are different things. Now we test it. I drove the tractor out of the barn into Wednesday morning sunlight. The engine pulled smoothly, responded to throttle input like it had been waiting all these years to run properly. 6 o'clock, 10 hours until Grandma arrived. The south field stretched 40 acres behind the house, mostly flat, except for a gentle rise at the far end. We'd kept it fallow this year, letting the soil rest, but it still made good testing ground. I hitched up our heaviest plow, the 5-blade monster that always made the old tractor struggle. Used to take Grandpa most of a day to work through half the field with that implement. I started the engine engaged. The transmission felt the tractor dig in and pull. The plow cut through earth like soft butter. The engine maintained steady RPMs, no bogging down, no straining. I could shift into a higher gear than we'd ever used with this load. Catherine stood at the field edge watching. After 20 minutes, she waved me over. Take a break. You're grinning like an idiot. I shut down and climbed off. My hands were shaking from adrenaline, not fatigue. It's working. So far, but 20 minutes isn't 20 years. Claire arrived around noon, her Ford Falcon kicking up dust on the driveway. She brought lemonade and a thermos ice still clinking inside. Her eyes were red like she'd been crying, but she'd stopped now. How much have you done? About 2 acres. She looked at the field, at the clean furrows, at the tractor sitting there, like it was resting instead of exhausted. That would have taken Grandpa all morning. I know. She took a long drink of lemonade, looking at me over the rim of the glass. Be careful, please. I went back to work. Plowed for another hour, sun climbing, higher heat building until sweat soaked through my shirt. But the tractor kept pulling, kept working, kept proving that everything I'd done was right. At the far end of the field, I needed to turn around. Wide arc, plenty of room, nothing complicated. I'd made this turn 100 times on smaller equipment, but I forgot something crucial. This wasn't the old tractor anymore. It was stronger, faster, more responsive than my muscle memory expected. I gave it too much throttle coming out of the turn. The rear wheels, already stressed from pulling the heavy plow through resistant soil, lost traction. The whole machine lurched sideways. I yanked the steering wheel, trying to correct, but momentum had other ideas. The tractor slewed toward the irrigation ditch, picking up speed. I hit the brakes. Too late. We went over the edge. Not a flip, thank God. Just a hard slide down the embankment, the tractor tilting 45 degrees, threatening to roll, but somehow staying upright. Metal screaming. Something underneath crashed against rocks. Then we stopped wedged in the ditch at an angle that made my stomach hurt to look at. I killed the engine with shaking hands, climbed out carefully, trying not to shift the weight distribution. My legs barely held me when I hit solid ground. Claire was running across the field, her voice cracking with panic before the words resolved into my name. Are you hurt? Are you hurt? She reached me, grabbed my shoulders, checked me over with practiced nurse efficiency, looking for blood, broken bones, injuries I might not feel yet through adrenaline. I'm fine. You're not fine. You almost died. But I hadn't. The tractor was another story. Catherine slid down into the ditch, assessing damage with the cold eye of someone who'd seen plenty of mechanical disasters. Exhaust is broken. You've got a loose oil line, maybe worse. We need a winch to get this out. Claire checked her watch, and I knew what she was going to say before she said it. When's Grandma due back? 2 hours, maybe less. Then we better work fast. Catherine hiked back up the embankment to her truck, drove it across the field, positioned it at the top of the ditch. Her son, Christopher, showed up 30 minutes later. Must have been nearby, or she'd called him. I wasn't sure which. Navy veteran, 28 years old, built solid like his father had been. He brought a commercial-grade winch and chain that could probably pull a house off its foundation. He looked at the John Deere, at me, at the whole situation, and just shook his head. Let's get it out first. Talk later. Hooking up the winch took 15 minutes. Getting the angle right took another 10. The physics had to be perfect, or we'd just roll the tractor instead of pulling it out. Christopher started the winch motor. The chain went taut, metal groaning under stress. The tractor shifted, groaned, didn't move. He gave it more power. The truck's engine revved higher. The tractor lurched upward. 6 inches, a foot, 2 feet. Metal squealing. Something underneath tore loose, clattered down the ditch. Keep going. Another foot. Another. The tractor crested the edge of the embankment, tilted back toward level, finally sat flat on solid ground again. We'd gotten it out, but the damage was obvious even from a distance. Oil leaked from the disconnected line, leaving a trail across the field. The exhaust pipe hung at an angle. The weld I'd been so proud of split apart. Mud and scratches covered the green paint that was already faded. Claire looked at her watch again. 2 hours, 10 minutes. We worked like surgical teams in an emergency room. Catherine and I tackled the exhaust pipe, re-welding the brake, while Christopher and Claire traced the oil leak to its source. A mounting bracket had come loose, nothing catastrophic but needing immediate attention. The welding went faster this time. My hands knew what to do, even if my mind was screaming about time running out. The weld held, not beautiful, but functional, good enough to get us through. Christopher tightened the oil line, topped off the reservoir with fresh oil from Grandpa's supply in the barn. Claire found touch-up paint and covered the worst of the scratches, though nothing could hide them completely if someone looked close. 4:15. We were out of time. Start it. Let's see if it runs. I turned the key. The engine fired up, but the sound was different now. A small tick-tick-tick in the rhythm. Something not quite right. Something working itself loose or broken in a way that would get worse. What's that noise? Catherine listened, her face grim. Could be nothing. Could be something working itself loose. Won't know without tearing it down again. We don't have time for that. No, we don't. So what do? You pray your grandma doesn't notice. And tomorrow, you tell your grandpa everything. Claire drove the tractor back to the barn while I cleaned up tools, hid evidence, tried to make everything look normal. We'd just gotten the barn doors closed when Grandma Helen's car appeared on the driveway. I walked out to meet her, forcing my breathing steady, keeping my hands from shaking. You're home. How did it go? She got out slowly, moving like someone who'd spent too long in a car seat. Looked at me with eyes that seemed to see straight through to everything I'd done. The bank agreed to extend the loan. We have until December now. That's great. Her voice came out flat, carrying no relief. We still owe the same amount. Just have more time to fail. She walked past me toward the house, then stopped, turned back. What did you do to the tractor? My heart stopped. Nothing. Why? She pointed at the ground. There's fresh oil on the driveway, and I can see it on your shirt. I looked down. She was right. Oil stains I'd missed dark against the fabric. The truth caught in my throat. I wanted to lie, to deny, to buy more time, but Grandma's eyes held mine, and I couldn't do it. I modified it while you were gone. I'm sorry. She didn't yell, didn't even look particularly angry, just tired. So tired. Does it still work? Yes, better than before, for now. The weight in those 2 words told me she understood more than I'd said. Come inside. We'll talk after supper. But we didn't talk after supper. Grandma went to her room early, claiming exhaustion from the drive. No conversation, no consequences. Just silence that felt heavier than any punishment. I lay awake most of the night waiting for something that didn't come. Around midnight, footsteps in the hallway. My door opened a crack. Grandma's silhouette stood there backlit from the hall. "Tomorrow morning your grandfather will see what you've done, and you will tell him everything, the whole truth, no lies, no excuses. Understand?" "Yes, ma'am. What you did was dishonest, Sarah, not because you modified the tractor, because you hid it from us. Trust matters more than machinery." The door closed. I stared at the ceiling, her words echoing. I hadn't thought about it that way. Hadn't considered that the real betrayal wasn't touching the John Deere. It was making decisions that affected everyone while pretending I was acting alone. Friday morning arrived too fast. I barely slept, kept jolting awake thinking I'd heard Grandpa's truck. Finally gave up around 5 and went downstairs. Grandma was already up making coffee, moving through the kitchen with her usual precise efficiency. "He'll be home around 6:30. I suggest you're in the barn when he arrives." I drank coffee I didn't want, ate toast that tasted like cardboard, watched the clock tick toward judgment. 6:20. I walked to the barn. The John Deere sat in its usual spot, looking almost normal in the dim light, almost like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. I'd changed it, broken some invisible rule I hadn't fully understood until it was too late. 6:30 came and went. 6:45, 7 o'clock. Then I heard it. Grandpa's truck engine, that distinctive rattle that meant he needed a new muffler, but would probably drive it until it fell off completely. The truck pulled up to the house. Engine died. Door opened and closed. Footsteps approached the barn boots on gravel, steady and unhurried. I stood next to the tractor, hands at my sides, trying to figure out where to look. The barn door opened. Grandpa Walter stepped inside, carrying his overnight bag, looking road-worn and tired. His eyes went to the John Deere, and he froze. Just stopped moving, stopped breathing, stopped being anything except a man staring at something impossible. I counted seconds in my head. 10, 20, 30. His face went through changes I'd never seen before. Confusion. First, his eyes tracking over the modified carburetor, the new air intake, the different exhaust configuration. Then recognition as he understood what he was seeing. Then something that looked like horror. The overnight bag slipped from his hand, hit the floor with a soft thump. Grandpa took 3 steps toward the tractor, reached out, touched the new carburetor like he was checking if it was real. His other hand went to his shirt pocket, pulled out something small, my father's journal. The one I'd left in the barn by accident, too, rushed and panicked to remember it. When Grandpa looked at me, his eyes were wet. "You knew Robert tried this." His voice came out barely above a whisper, rough like gravel. "Yes, sir. I found his journal. I read what happened. And you did it anyway." I learned from his mistakes, did it differently. Grandpa walked around the tractor, slowly inspecting every change I'd made. His hands trembled when he touched the welds, traced the new fuel lines, examined the modified mounting brackets. "This tractor is all we have. You understand that? Without it, we lose everything." "I know." "Then why would you risk it?" The words burst out of me louder than I meant, carrying all the fear and desperation I'd been holding inside. "Because we're losing everything anyway. We owe money we can't pay. Grandma needs medicine we can barely afford. If we keep doing what we've always done, we fail. At least this way there's a chance." Grandpa turned away from me, put both hands on the tractor's hood, leaned his weight against it. His shoulders shook. He was crying. I'd never seen Grandpa Walter cry. Not when Grandma got her diabetes diagnosis. Not at any of the funerals I could remember. Not ever. But he was crying now, and I didn't know what to do except stand there and feel like the worst person in Kansas. "I lost your father to this machine." The words came out broken, separated by gasps for air. He was so confident, so sure he could improve it. I told him to leave it alone. He didn't listen. Grandpa straightened up, wiped his face with his sleeve, but the tears kept coming. The accident wasn't random, Sarah. He was working on the tractor while it was running, trying to adjust something live. I told him it was dangerous. He said he knew what he was doing. The engine caught his shirt, pulled him in. By the time I got to him, he couldn't finish, didn't need to. I stood there, my own eyes burning, understanding for the first time the weight of what I'd done. I hadn't just modified a tractor. I'd reopened a wound that had never really healed. I didn't know. I'm so sorry. I didn't know that's how it happened. Now you do. Now you know why I can't lose you too. The barn door opened. Grandma Helen stepped inside, her presence somehow making the space feel less crushing. Walter, that's enough. Her voice was gentle but firm. Sarah is not Robert. She didn't work on a running engine. She spent 6 weeks preparing. She learned proper welding from Catherine Walsh. She had a plan, but she lied to us. Yes, she did. And that was wrong. Grandma turned to look at me. Very wrong. Trust is sacred in this family, and you broke it. Then back to Grandpa. But lying about the project doesn't mean the project itself was foolish. Our granddaughter isn't reckless. She's desperate. And maybe we should have been listening when that desperation started showing. Grandma moved closer, stood between Grandpa and me like a referee. What's done is done. The tractor is modified. Now we need to know if it works. Walter, you need to test it. Grandpa looked at her like she'd suggested jumping off a cliff. Unless you want Sarah's work to be meaningless, test it. See what she built, then decide. He stared at the John Deere for a long moment, jaw working like he was chewing something tough. Then nodded once, short and sharp. All right, we'll test it. But if anything is wrong, anything at all, we stop immediately. He looked at me. Get in. We're going to North Ridge Field. My stomach dropped. North Ridge. The field with the heaviest clay soil in the county. The field where my father had died. That seemed intentional. A test with layers I wasn't ready to face. We walked across the property in silence. Grandpa drove. I sat on the fender like I had 100 times before. Grandma and Claire followed in Grandma's car. Catherine Morrison's truck appeared too. She must have seen us heading out. The whole family gathered to watch me either save us or destroy us. Grandpa engaged the transmission, started pulling the same 5-blade plow I'd used yesterday. The tractor dug in muscles of steel and combustion coming to life. For 10 minutes, everything was perfect. The engine pulled smoothly through clay soil that normally made it labor. The power increase was undeniable even to someone as skeptical as Grandpa. I saw his grip on the steering wheel loosen slightly. Saw something like hope start to show in his face. Then the ticking sound I'd heard yesterday came back. Louder now, more insistent. Grandpa heard it instantly, killed the engine, climbed down. What's that noise? I don't know. It started after the accident yesterday. What accident? I told him everything. The test run, the lost traction, the slide into the ditch, the damage, the rushed repairs. Every detail I'd been hoping to hide. Every mistake I'd made trying to fix my mistakes. Grandpa's face went through several colors. Red, white, red again. You crashed it. You crashed it and didn't tell me. I was going to tell you. I promised Claire I would. But you didn't tell me when I first walked in. You let me find out like this. He knelt next to the tractor, started examining the undercarriage. I knelt beside him, watching his hands move over the metal with the confidence of someone who'd spent 50 years learning machines. His hand stopped on something I couldn't see from my angle, stayed there a long moment. Sarah, look at this. I crawled under further. He was pointing at a gasket, old and cracked, barely holding together. This has been failing for weeks, maybe months. How can you tell? Because this is original equipment and it's rotted through. He kept examining movements, getting more focused. Found the oil line that had come loose in the crash, traced it to its connection point. This wasn't loose because of the accident. The mount was already failing. The crash just finished what was already breaking. He slid out from under the tractor, oil-stained and thoughtful. If you hadn't taken this machine apart, I never would have found these problems. Another 2 weeks, maybe 3, and this engine would have seized completely. During harvest season, he stood up, looked at me straight on. The exhaust work you did is sloppy. You rushed the welds after the accident and it shows. But the core modifications, the carburetor, the intake system, the design work, those are solid. He paused, and in that pause, the whole world seemed to hold its breath. You had no right to do this without permission. You broke our trust and put yourself in danger, but you also might have saved this farm from total disaster. I didn't know what to say. Sorry felt too small. Thank you felt wrong. We're going to fix this properly, you and me together. Then we're going to set rules about what you can and cannot touch without asking. Yes, sir. Catherine Morrison walked over from where she'd been watching near her truck. The girl did good work, Walter, with supervision. With supervision being the key phrase. He looked at Catherine. Thank you for keeping her alive. Someone had to. She's too stubborn to quit once she starts something. Grandma Helen's voice came from behind us, carrying that particular tone that meant she was about to make a point. Wonder where she gets that from. And despite everything, the fear, the guilt, the exhaustion, I saw Grandpa's mouth twitch. Not quite a smile, but close. For the first time since he'd walked into that barn, I thought maybe we'd be okay. The next week blurred into a rhythm of careful work. Grandpa and I rebuilt the engine mounts with precision that made my earlier attempts look like guesswork. He showed me how to read metal fatigue, how to spot stress concentrations before they became failures. We replaced the gasket that had been dying slowly, the one that would have killed the engine if I hadn't found it by accident. The exhaust welds got redone completely. Catherine Morrison supervised, standing over my shoulder while I ground down my rushed work and started fresh. She didn't let me take shortcuts. Didn't accept good enough when perfect was possible. Wrong. The bead's wandering. Your hand isn't steady. I started over. Again and again until the weld met her standards. Claire brought lunch to the barn every day around noon. Sandwiches and lemonade sitting with us while we worked. Relief visible in the way her shoulders had unclenched. The crisis had passed. We were still a family. By Friday afternoon, the John Deere ran like it had been waiting 21 years to run properly. No ticking, no leaks, just smooth power that made Grandpa shake his head in something that might have been admiration or disbelief or both. News spread through Oak Ridge the way news always did in small towns. People talked at the diner, at the feed store, at church on Sunday. The Morgan girl modified her family's tractor. Some folks were impressed. Others thought we were crazy messing with equipment that old, trusting a 15-year-old with machinery worth more than most cars. Saturday morning, a weathered pickup pulled into our driveway. The driver climbed out holding his hat, introduced himself as Thomas Hayes. He'd heard about what I'd done. Had an international harvester giving him trouble. Wondered if I could take a look. Grandpa glanced at me, then back at Thomas. She could. But there's conditions. Thomas waited, hat turning in his hands. 1, I supervise the whole job. 2, you pay a fair rate for both our time. 3, you understand we're learning as we go. Fair enough. $50 sound reasonable. $50. More money than I'd ever earned in my life. More than seemed possible for work I'd do with my own hands. That evening, Grandpa called me into the barn. He looked serious, which wasn't unusual, but also uncertain, which was. If you're going to work on other people's equipment, we need rules. I'm listening. First, complete honesty. You tell me everything you're planning, every step. No secrets. I promise. Second, no rushing. We work careful, methodical. Quality over speed. Okay. Third, we work together. You don't take on jobs without me or Catherine Morrison present. Not until you've got at least 2 more years' experience. That's fair. He pulled something from the workbench drawer, a small box wrapped in brown paper tied with twine. This is for you. Early birthday present. Inside was a set of precision measuring tools, micrometers, calipers, gauges, professional-grade equipment that must have cost more than we'd made from 2 months of crop work. "You're talented, Sarah. Your father would be proud. But talent without discipline is dangerous. These tools will help you learn precision. Use them well." I couldn't speak, just nodded and held the box like it was made of something more precious than steel. Our first real job started the following Monday. Thomas Hayes lived on a farm about 20 miles east near the town line. His International Harvester was a '58 model, completely different architecture than our John Deere. Different fuel system, different cooling setup, different everything. Grandpa warned me on the drive over, his hand steady on the steering wheel of his old Ford. Every machine is unique. What worked on ours won't necessarily work on his. You understand? I understand. But understanding a concept and truly knowing it in your bones are different things. I'd learned that lesson the hard way. We spent 3 days diagnosing the problem. The symptoms looked familiar. Carburetor issues similar to what our tractor had experienced. Loss of power under load, inconsistent fuel delivery, rough idle. I felt confident. Had done this before, could do it again. On the 3rd day, we got down to the rebuild. Grandpa suggested using a Type A gasket for the carburetor assembly. Standard part, proven reliability, designed for this engine's operating temperature. I disagreed. Type B would be better. It's newer, can handle higher temperatures, better material science. Grandpa studied me for a long moment. "Are you sure this engine runs hotter than ours?" "I'm sure." "Your call, but you own the results." We installed everything carefully, precisely. I used the measuring tools he'd given me, checked tolerances twice. The work was clean, professional. I was certain I was right. 3 days later, Thomas Hayes called. His voice came through the phone line tight with anger that barely covered panic. "The tractor's completely dead. Engine seized. I need you out here now." We drove over immediately. One look under the hood told the story. The Type B gasket had failed under higher heat than I'd calculated. The failure had been catastrophic, spreading through multiple systems like a disease. Metal scored where it shouldn't be. Oil where it had no business going. Damage that couldn't be repaired with a simple fix. Thomas stood with his arms crossed, face red from sun and fury. "This isn't a simple fix. This is a total rebuild. Do you have any idea what you've done? Harvest starts in 2 weeks. Without this tractor, I lose my entire crop." "Mr. Hayes, I'm so sorry. I'll fix it. I'll make it right." Fix it with what I need: a complete replacement engine. That's $500. Where's a 15-year-old farm girl going to get $500? The number hit like a physical blow. $500. More than our family had saved even with the loan extension. More than I could earn in years of small repair jobs. More than existed in my world as a tangible possibility. Grandpa pulled Thomas aside, spoke in low tones I couldn't hear. Thomas shook his head, walked to his truck without looking back. The sound of his engine starting felt like a door closing. On the drive home, Grandpa didn't say anything. The silence was louder than any lecture, heavier than any punishment. It said everything that needed saying. That night, the family held counsel around the kitchen table. Grandma had her ledger open, pencil in hand, running numbers that refused to add up, no matter how many times she calculated. "We have 147 in savings." Claire spoke up immediately, her voice carrying the same determination she used in the hospital when difficult decisions needed making. "I have 280 in my account, savings for nursing school. I can use that." Grandma's response came swift and final. "Absolutely not. That's your future." "I'll quit school, get a job, pay it back." Grandpa's voice cut through, brooking no argument. "No, you made the mistake, but we don't sacrifice your education for it." I sat there feeling like the weight of everyone's disappointment might crush me into the floor. This wasn't like the tractor accident in the ditch. This was worse. I'd hurt someone outside our family, damaged their livelihood through my arrogance, my certainty that I knew better. Saturday morning, Catherine Morrison's truck pulled into our driveway. She got out carrying an envelope, walked into our kitchen like she belonged there, set the envelope on the table. $500. Grandpa started to protest, but she raised a hand. Catherine, we can't accept this. Yes, you can. This is money Sarah earned working for me over the past 2 years. I've been saving it for her. But that's your money. No, it's hers. She worked for it. Now she's paying for her education. She looked at me directly, her eyes holding mine with an intensity that made everything else fade away. But there's a condition. You take this money, you commit to learning properly. No more shortcuts. No more assumptions. You study, you practice, you listen to people with more experience. Understood. Yes, ma'am. And you pay me back. Not in dollars. In becoming the best mechanic in this county. I took the envelope with shaking hands. It felt heavier than paper should, weighted with more than currency. It carried expectation, trust, given again after I'd broken it, a second chance I didn't deserve but desperately needed. That afternoon we paid Thomas Hayes. He accepted the money without comment, but his eyes when he looked at me carried something that wasn't quite forgiveness. Maybe it never would be. The next 3 months taught me more than the previous 15 years. Grandpa and Catherine Morrison became my teachers in a way they hadn't been before. They didn't just show me how to fix things. They taught me how to think about problems, how to question my assumptions, how to recognize the difference between confidence and competence. Every machine got treated as unique. Every assumption got questioned. Every shortcut got called out and corrected. I learned to say, I don't know, more often than I'm sure. Learned that admitting ignorance was the first step toward knowledge. We fixed Thomas Hayes's tractor correctly, refused payment for the work which took 2 weeks of careful rebuilding. He thawed slightly after that, eventually sent another customer our way with a grudging recommendation that we were careful now, thorough, could be trusted. Word spread differently this time. Not the miracle girl mechanic who could resurrect old equipment with magic and youth. The girl who'd made a massive mistake and learned from it. That was better anyway. More honest. October brought the Oak Ridge County Fair, a 3-day event where farmers showed equipment and produce, where kids showed livestock, where the whole county gathered to celebrate the harvest season before winter locked everything down. Grandpa and I set up a demonstration. The modified John Deere pulling against modern equipment, showing what old iron could do with proper engineering. People gathered to watch, asking questions, taking notes. Some looked skeptical. Others looked interested. Brandon Brennan appeared with his father Richard, both standing back from the crowd, initially watching. The demonstration went well. The tractor pulled loads that surprised even the skeptics, maintained steady power that modern equipment matched but didn't exceed. After the crowd dispersed, Brandon approached. His hands were in his pockets, his posture different than I remembered. Less arrogant, more uncertain. He looked younger than 16 somehow. That's actually impressive. I kept my guard up, remembering his words from months ago. Thanks. I'm sorry about what I said last summer. About girls not understanding machines. That was stupid. Okay. Just okay. What do you want me to say, Brandon? That it hurt. It did. That you were wrong. You were. But holding grudges takes energy. I'd rather use it learning things. He sat on a hay bale near the demonstration area, and for the first time since I'd known him, he looked genuinely uncomfortable in a way that seemed real rather than performed. My dad expects me to take over the farm. 400 acres, all the newest equipment, everything. But I don't understand any of it. I can drive a tractor, but I couldn't fix one if my life depended on it. So learn, from who my dad doesn't have time to teach. Dealership guys just want to sell us new parts. Catherine Morrison teaches welding Saturday mornings. Library has books on engine mechanics. Or you could just admit you're interested and find someone to mentor you. He looked at me like I'd suggested something revolutionary. Would you teach me not for free or anything? I'd pay. Before I could answer, Grandpa's voice came from behind me. You'd have to start at the beginning. Basic tools, basic principles. No shortcuts because you're impatient or think you're above manual labor. I'm not above anything. I just want to understand what I'm doing instead of pretending I know. All right then. Saturdays you come to our place. Help with whatever needs doing. We'll teach you while we work. Brandon showed up the following Saturday at 7 sharp. Wore clothes he clearly didn't mind ruining. Stayed until dusk. Didn't say much at first, just watched Grandpa and me work on a neighbor's grain auger that needed bearing replacement. After an hour, he asked quietly, "Can I help?" Grandpa handed him a wrench. "Start by learning which end does what." Over the following weeks, something shifted. Brandon worked hard, asked smart questions, took notes in a small leather journal like the ones engineers used. His arrogance redirected itself toward learning instead of showing off. We didn't become friends exactly, but we developed mutual respect. Two people learning the same lessons from different starting points, discovering that machinery didn't care about money or pride, only about whether you understood it. The high school counselor pulled me aside in October, catching me in the hallway between classes. "Have you thought about college, Sarah? Your grades are excellent, especially in math and science." I hadn't thought about college. College was for people with money and plans, neither of which applied to me. "We need the farm. I can't leave Grandma and Grandpa." There are scholarships, programs specifically for girls interested in engineering. You could commute to Kansas State or even apply to bigger schools. I'll think about it. But I didn't think about it. Not seriously. The idea felt too big, too far away from the life I knew. 2 weeks later, Catherine Morrison brought it up while we were welding frame repairs for a neighbor's trailer. "That counselor talked to you about college. How did you know?" Oak Ridge is a small town. Everyone knows everything. She raised her welding shield, examined her work critically. My husband wanted to be an engineer. Studied for 2 years before money ran out. Had to come back work the farm. He never regretted the decision, but he never stopped wondering what if. "You think I should go?" "I think you should have options, and options require preparation. Applications, test scores, portfolios of work. I barely know what I want to do next month. How am I supposed to plan for 4 years from now?" "You don't plan the whole journey, just the next step, then the step after that." She pulled out a welding rod, handed it to me. "Make this bead perfect. Not good enough. Perfect. That's how you build a future, one perfect step at a time." November brought a letter from Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Someone had sent them my name, probably that counselor, and they were inviting me to apply for their engineering program. The letter sat on my dresser for a week. I'd take it out, read it, put it back. MIT was for geniuses, for rich kids with prep school educations, for people who belonged in places like that. Not for farm girls from Kansas who smelled like tractor grease no matter how many showers they took. Grandma found me staring at the letter one evening, the paper worn from repeated handling. "What's holding you back?" "I don't belong there. Look at me. Look at where I come from." She sat on my bed, patted the space beside her. When I sat down, she took my hand in hers. "When I was your age, women weren't supposed to manage money. That was men's work. I taught myself bookkeeping from library books, practiced on my father's farm accounts when he wasn't looking. People said I was being uppity, getting above my station. What did you do?" "I kept doing it anyway. Got so good that eventually people had to admit I was right. Changed what was possible for women in this town." Her hand tightened on mine. "You think you don't belong there because no one like you has gone before, but someone has to be first. Why not you?" "Because I'm scared." "Good. Fear means it matters." I filled out the MIT application on a Saturday in December. Took the required tests at a high school in Junction City. 2 hours of mathematics and science questions that felt simultaneously too hard and strangely familiar. Wrote essays about modifying tractors and learning from failure and understanding that the bravest thing isn't succeeding on the first try. Sent it all off in January and tried not to think about it. The John Deere kept running through another winter, another spring. We used it for our own work and hired it out for custom jobs. The extra income slowly building our savings to numbers that would have seemed impossible 2 years ago. By late November, we'd made the first major payment on the extended bank loan. The farm was still standing. That would have to be enough for now. Spring 1968 arrived with Claire's wedding. Small ceremony at the Methodist Church reception in the parish hall with cake and punch. She looked radiant in a simple white dress. Stephen Clark looked terrified in a way that was somehow endearing, and everyone cried during the vows. I stood next to her, as maid of honor, wearing a dress that felt foreign after months of coveralls and work boots. At the reception, she pulled me outside into the warm evening air. "I'm scared, Sarah. Scared of moving away, being a wife, all the things that could go wrong. You're the bravest person I know." "No, you are. You took apart the tractor that kept us alive. That's the scariest thing anyone in this family has ever done." She smoothed her dress, looked back at the parish hall where Stephen danced with Grandma. "But scared doesn't mean don't do it. It just means it matters enough to be worth the fear." May brought a letter from MIT thin envelope, which everyone said meant rejection. I sat at the kitchen table, letter in hand, unable to process what it said. "We regret to inform you that we are unable to offer you admission at this time." The words blurred. I set the letter down, stared at nothing. Wasn't surprised, really. Farm girl from Kansas. What had I been thinking? Grandma read over my shoulder. "This isn't the end." "It feels like it." "Then you haven't been paying attention to your own story. You failed with Thomas Hayes's tractor. Then what happened?" "I learned from it." "Exactly." 2 weeks later, another letter arrived, thicker this time. My hands shook opening it. "Dear Miss Morgan, after further review of your application and additional recommendation letters, we are pleased to offer you admission to MIT's class of 1972 with full scholarship covering tuition, room, and board. We were particularly impressed by your practical application of engineering principles and your documented ability to learn from failure. Full scholarship. Everything covered. Start fall 1968. The kitchen erupted. Grandma cried happy tears this time. Grandpa gripped my shoulder, couldn't speak, just nodded over and over. Claire hugged me so tight I couldn't breathe. Summer passed in a blur. I worked the farm full-time, but differently now. Every problem became an opportunity to apply what I was learning to test ideas before I left. Redesign the irrigation system using fluid dynamics principles. Modified the grain storage ventilation based on thermodynamics. The farm became my laboratory, my proving ground. July brought a visit to North Ridge Field with Grandpa, the place where my father had died, where I'd tested the modified tractor almost a year ago. We stood at the edge looking across soil that had seen both tragedy and redemption. "Your father would be so proud of who you've become." I wish I could tell him. "You can. Just live in a way that honors what he taught you." He pulled out my father's journal, the one I'd found in the attic, the one that had started everything. "This is yours now, all of it. Keep it. Remember where you came from." August brought packing and goodbyes. Amanda Parker helped sitting on my bed while I sorted clothes and books. "You're really leaving?" "Just for school. I'll come back. Promise. Promise. Someone has to keep you out of trouble." She laughed, then her expression turned serious. "You're going to do amazing things, Sarah. Don't forget about us small-town people." "Never." Catherine Morrison's goodbye came in her workshop surrounded by metal and welding equipment and the smell of oil. "Don't let those city engineers convince you that book learning is better than practical knowledge. You've got both. That makes you dangerous." "Dangerous how?" "The kind that changes things." Brandon's goodbye surprised me. He showed up at the barn the Saturday before I left, awkward in a way that seemed genuine. "I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for you." I'd still be the arrogant rich kid who didn't know which end of a wrench to hold. "You taught yourself. I just pointed the direction. That's more than anyone else did." He paused, hands in pockets. "Don't let MIT change you. Stay the girl who wasn't afraid to take apart the tractor everyone said was untouchable." The night before I left, I walked to the barn one last time. Late August evening heat still radiating from the day. The John Deere sat in its usual spot. 23 years old now, still running strong. I put my hand on the hood, metal cool despite summer warmth. Thank you. Not sure if I was talking to the machine, to my father's memory, to Grandpa for teaching me, to myself for having the courage to try. Maybe all of them. Morning came too soon and too slow at once. Grandpa drove me to Wichita Airport, 2-hour drive through Kansas flatland. We didn't talk much, didn't need to. The silence was comfortable, familiar, the kind you only get with people who know you completely. At security, he handed me a small wooden box. Open it when you get to Boston. The flight gave me time to think about being the scared 15-year-old who'd taken apart a tractor, about failing and learning and discovering I was stronger than fear, about each generation standing on the shoulders of the one before. Boston hit me like walking into a different world, but the wooden box waited until I was alone in my dorm room. Inside was a photograph. Grandpa standing next to the John Deere in 1946. Young and hopeful, the war behind him and a future ahead. And a note in his careful handwriting. Sarah, you've already done the hard part. Everything from here is just details. Remember, each generation stands on the shoulders of the one before reaching a little higher. You're my shoulders now. Reach high. Love, Grandpa Walter. I graduated MIT in 1972 with a degree in mechanical engineering, the first woman in my family to finish college. The Morgan farm never missed another loan payment. Brandon Brennan became one of the best mechanics in Kansas, eventually took over his father's farm and actually knew how to fix the equipment. Catherine Morrison taught welding until she was 75. Trained 2 generations of students, including 3 other girls who became engineers. Amanda Parker went to medical school, became a doctor, still my best friend. And that John Deere Model B is still running, still modified, still proving that sometimes the biggest risks lead to the greatest rewards. My father was right. Metal doesn't care if you're a girl or a boy, it just needs someone who understands it. And Grandma Helen was right too. Trust once broken and rebuilt becomes stronger than if it had never been tested. Because that's what we do. Each generation stands on the shoulders of the one before reaching a little higher. Was I brave or reckless, honest or dishonest, right or wrong? Maybe I was all of those things. Maybe that's what growing up means. Learning that life isn't about being perfect. It's about trying, failing, learning, and trying again. Have you ever had to risk everything for something you believed in? Have you ever made a mistake that taught you more than any success? The answers to those questions don't come easy. They come through sweat and tears and oil-stained hands, through nights spent wondering if you've destroyed everything, and mornings discovering you've saved it. They come through the courage to admit when you're wrong, and the humility to learn from people who know more. They come through the kind of work that breaks you down and builds you back stronger. That summer of '67, I was a 15-year-old girl who thought she knew everything. By the time I left for Boston, I'd learned the most important lesson of all. The wisest thing you can say isn't "I know," it's "I'm learning," and that made all the difference.